What if the monsters weren't the ones with fangs and claws, but the ones who smiled at you in public? And what if your only hope, your only chance at seeing another sunrise, came wrapped in leather and riding a storm of chrome and thunder? Look around you. Who would you turn to when the law is bought and the system is broken? Sometimes, the only people willing to ride into hell for you are the ones who already call it home. The air in the roadside diner was thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. For Elara, it was the smell of a 15-minute parole. 15 minutes to breathe air that wasn't recycled through the vents of Marcus Thorne's sterile, silent mansion. 15 minutes where his hand wasn't on her arm. His voice wasn't a venomous whisper in her ear. He sat across from her in the cracked vinyl booth, a portrait of calm, tailored civility. To the tired waitress, to the trucker nursing a lukewarm cup of joe, he was just a handsome man treating his girl to a meal. They didn't see the bruise blooming like a dark flower on her ribs, hidden beneath her sweater. They didn't see the way her eyes darted to the exit, a frantic, caged thing searching for a gap in the bars. Marcus was a connoisseur of control, and his preferred method was a delicate, soul-crushing terror that left few visible marks but shattered everything inside. He'd isolated her from her friends, her family, her life, until the only world that existed was the one he permitted. A world of locked doors, monitored calls, and the constant, thrumming fear of his temper. A sudden roar outside shook the diner's windows, a guttural symphony of V-twin engines that vibrated through the floorboards. A dozen Harley-Davidsons pulled into the gravel lot, a tide of black leather and polished chrome gleaming under the weak afternoon sun. Patches adorned their vests, proclaiming their allegiance, Hell's Angels. They moved with a predatory grace, a brotherhood of giants filling the doorway, their sheer presence sucking the air out of the room. At their lead was a man who seemed carved from granite and fury. Tattoos snaked up his neck, disappearing into a thick, dark beard. His eyes, cold and sharp, scanned the room with an unnervous authority. This was Reaper, president of the charter, a man whose reputation was a whispered legend in the underbelly of the city. He carried the weight of his road name with an unnerving stillness. His crew, a collection of scarred, bearded men, settled into booths and stools, their quiet camaraderie a stark contrast to their intimidating appearance. One of them, a mountain of a man with a wild beard they called Grizz, sat near the counter, his gaze unintentionally drifting towards Elara's booth. He saw her flinch when Marcus's phone buzzed, a movement so small, so instinctual, it was almost invisible. He saw the way she held her coffee cup, her knuckles white, her hand trembling. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of a stray dog kicked one too many times. He nudged Reaper, a subtle nod in her direction. Reaper's eyes flickered over. He saw the expensive suit on the man and the threadbare hope in the woman's eyes. A familiar, bitter taste filled his mouth. He saw a ghost, the ghost of his younger sister, Sarah, her smile fading over the years until it was just a memory swallowed by a monster in a nice suit, just like this one. Marcus's phone buzzed again, an insistent, angry vibration. Business, he clipped, his smile not reaching his eyes as he stood. I'll take this outside. Don't move. It wasn't a request. It was a command reinforced by the brief, tight squeeze he gave her shoulder, a painful reminder of his ownership. He walked out, his back straight, his confidence absolute. This was it. A crack in the cage. A breath. Elara's heart hammered against her bruised ribs. Her mind screamed. Run. Hide. Scream. But her body was frozen, paralyzed by years of conditioned fear. Then her eyes landed on the bikers. On Reaper. He was the most dangerous thing in the room, a walking personification of violence and mayhem. And in that moment, he was her only hope. She slid out of the booth, her legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed. Every instinct screamed at her to be invisible, to obey Marcus, but a deeper, more primal instinct for survival pushed her forward. She walked towards the biker leader, the eyes of his entire crew following her. She stopped in front of his table, a small, trembling ship before a tidal wave. Reaper didn't speak. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. He's coming back. Her eyes pleaded, raw and desperate. Tell him you're my dad. Please, the request hung in the air, absurd and desperate. The other bikers exchanged confused glances. Grizz leaned forward, his brow furrowed. But Reaper didn't blink. He saw Sarah's eyes staring back at him from the stranger's face. He remembered the last time he'd seen her, the faint bruise on her cheek she tried to hide with makeup, the lie in her voice when she said she was happy. He had believed the lie. He had let her go. He would not make that mistake again. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Sit down, sweetheart, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was surprisingly gentle. Everything's going to be all right. Elara practically fell into the chair beside him just as the diner door opened and Marcus strode back in, his face a mask of cold fury. He saw her, not in their booth, but sitting with the leader of an outlaw motorcycle club. His jaw tightened. The dramatic irony was lost on him. He saw a challenge to his authority, not a desperate plea for salvation. He stalked toward the table, his expensive shoes silent on the linoleum. Elara, we're leaving, he commanded, reaching for her arm. Before his fingers could touch her, a massive, tattooed hand shot out and clamped around his wrist. Reaper's grip was like iron. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. I don't think we've been introduced, Reaper said, his voice dangerously calm. My daughter tells me you were just leaving. Marcus's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and then pure, unadulterated rage. Your daughter? He sneered, trying to wrench his arm free. Reaper's grip tightened, and Marcus winced. You got a problem, old man? From the surrounding tables, leather creaked as a dozen Hell's Angels rose to their feet in silent, menacing unison. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't have to. They were the weapons. Marcus Thorne was a man used to power. He bought politicians, he intimidated rivals, he broke people. But the currency of his world, money and fear, was worthless here. These men operated on a different code, one written in blood and loyalty. He looked from Reaper's unyielding eyes to the wall of hostile bikers, and then to Elara, who was staring at him with something he hadn't seen in years, defiance. He was outnumbered and outmatched. For now, he ripped his wrist away, a red mark already forming on his skin. This isn't over, he hissed, his threat directed at Elara. He turned and stormed out of the diner, the door slamming shut behind him. The tension in the room broke. Elara started to tremble violently, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline. Grizz placed a cup of water in front of her. Easy there, kid, he said softly. Reaper finally let go of a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He looked at the girl beside him, truly looked at her. He saw the faint yellowing of an older bruise on her temple, partially hidden by her hair. He saw the terror that still swam in her eyes, even with Marcus gone. What's your name? He asked. Elara, she whispered. And his? Marcus Thorne. The name meant nothing to Reaper, but Grizz, who had an ear for the city's whispers, stiffened. Thorne? As in, Thorne Construction, he asked, his voice grim. He's not just a suit, Reaper. He's into some real dark stuff. Human trafficking, money laundering. He's got half the city council in his pocket. This guy's not just an abuser. He's a kingpin. The weight of the situation settled over them. This wasn't just about saving a woman from a violent boyfriend. They had just declared war on a powerful and ruthless criminal. For a moment, doubt flickered. They had their own business, their own problems. But then Reaper looked at Elara, who was watching him with a fragile, desperate hope. He thought of Sarah, of the promise he'd made to her grave that he would never again stand by while the innocent suffered. The club's code was clear. They took care of their own, and they protected those who couldn't protect themselves. Elara had asked for their help. She was under their protection now. That made her one of their own. He's not leaving town, Grizz stated, pulling out his phone. Men like Thorne don't run. They retaliate. He'll come for her, no, Reaper said, his voice hardening into steel. We'll go for him first. The mission was no longer a matter of choice. It was a matter of honor. Grizz began making calls, his voice low and urgent, gathering intel. The other bikers formed a protective circle, their earlier menace transformed into a quiet, watchful guardianship. Elara, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of something she thought was long dead. Hope. She was still terrified, but she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by monsters, yes, but these monsters were here to fight the one that had been hiding in plain sight. A flashback ripped through her mind, unbidden. The sickening thud of a locked door, Marcus's voice, silky and cruel, listing her failures. The way he'd smash a plate, a glass, anything to see her jump, to feed off her fear. He never had to hit her face. He was too smart for that. He dismantled her piece by piece, isolating her until her reflection was a stranger. He had promised her a beautiful life, a gilded cage, but she hadn't realized the bars were forged from her own silence. Now, the roar of Harley engines was the sound of those bars beginning to break. Reaper laid out the plan on the sticky table of the clubhouse, using beer bottles and shot glasses to represent Thorne's sprawling estate. The place was a fortress, complete with high walls, security cameras, and a staff of private thugs. Grizz had been thorough. He'd learned that Thorne didn't just abuse Elara. She was one of several. He was running a sophisticated trafficking ring, preying on vulnerable women, holding them captive in a luxury prison he called a home. He's got a shipment coming in tomorrow night, Grizz explained, pointing a thick finger at a bottle cap representing the main gate. A new guest. The gate will be open for a 5-minute window. That's our way in. It was a suicide mission. Thorne had more men, better weapons, and home field advantage. But the Hell's Angels had something he didn't, righteous fury. Reaper's eyes met each of his brothers. He didn't have to give a speech. They saw the ghost of his sister in his gaze. They understood this was more than a job. It was a redemption. "We ride at midnight," Reaper declared. The night of the rescue was cloaked in a cold, relentless rain. The world was a smear of wet asphalt and neon reflections. Elara was safely hidden at a remote cabin belonging to one of the club's old-timers, but her mind was with them, every roar of an engine a prayer. The bikers moved like shadows, their engines cut a mile from the estate. They were a silent, lethal force moving through the woods that bordered Thorne's property. The plan was simple. Grizz and a small team would create a diversion at the south fence, drawing the bulk of the guards, while Reaper led the main assault through the gate during the brief window Grizz had discovered. The timing had to be perfect. As a black van approached the gates, Grizz's team set off a series of small, controlled explosions at the far end of the property. Alarms blared. Guards scrambled, their attention diverted. The main gate slid open to admit the van. That was the signal. Reaper twisted the throttle, and his bike roared to life, a dragon waking from its slumber. One by one, the engines ignited a thunderous chorus of defiance that ripped through the night. They stormed the gates, a wave of leather and steel, catching the few remaining guards by complete surprise. The confrontation was brutal and swift. The bikers fought with a controlled ferocity, a whirlwind of fists and steel-toed boots. They weren't killers, but they were men who understood violence intimately. They moved through the manicured lawns and marble hallways of Thorne's mansion, a force of primal justice in a place of sophisticated evil. Reaper found Marcus Thorne in his office, a sleek, minimalist room that overlooked the chaos. Thorne was on the phone, trying to call for backup that would never come. He looked up, his face a mask of disbelief as Reaper filled the doorway. "You?" Thorne spat, his composure finally cracking. "You think you can just walk in here? Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly what you are," Reaper growled, advancing on him. "You're a coward who preys on the weak. A ghost. And tonight, you're going to pay for your sins." The fight was short and ugly. Thorne was strong, but his violence was born of sadism and control. Reaper's was forged in loss and a burning need for redemption. It was no contest. As Reaper subdued Thorne, he heard a noise from behind a hidden panel in the wall. With the help of his men, he pried it open, revealing a small, soundproofed room. Inside were 2 other young women, pale and terrified, but alive. They had rescued more than just Elara. They had dismantled a monster's entire operation. As the police, tipped off by an anonymous call from Grizz, swarmed the estate, the Hell's Angels slipped away as quietly as they had come, melting back into the rainy night. Their work was done. A week later, Elara stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and orange. The air was clean, and for the first time, she could breathe it without fear. Reaper pulled up on his bike, the engine a familiar, comforting rumble. He didn't say much. He just handed her a small, wrapped package. Inside was a burner phone with one number programmed into it. His, and a small, silver pendant of a guardian angel's wing. "You're not alone anymore, kid," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "You ever need anything, you call." Elara looked at this intimidating, tattooed man who had ridden into hell for her. She saw not a criminal or a thug, but a savior, a protector, an unlikely father figure who had answered a desperate plea in a roadside diner. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You saved my life." Reaper just nodded, a flicker of smile touching his lips. He saw Sarah's smile in hers. "Just returning a favor," he said, before starting his bike and riding back toward the horizon. Months turned into a year. Elara found her strength. She testified against Thorne, her voice clear and strong, ensuring he and his entire network were locked away for good. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, using her story to empower others. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a warrior forged in fire. She kept the pendant, a constant reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear leather vests with angel wings on the back. So I ask you again, what would you do if your only hope was a Hell's Angel? Look past the leather, past the reputation. See the code. See the humanity. There is good and evil in this world, but it rarely looks the way you expect. Share this story if you believe that heroes can be found in the most unlikely of places. Comment with your own stories of unexpected saviors. And most importantly, if you or someone you know is in a cage, please find the courage to ask for help. You never know whose hand will be there to pull you out.